What do you do when your city is under siege? But it's not just any city. This is Duldatgumver. My other half challenged me to say that place name. I think I did it okay. No, this is a fantasy city, and it has a castle, and it has buildings and city walls, and importantly, buildings that were outside of the city walls and have fallen to the enemy, these hordes from the abyss that have come to lay siege to this city, whatever its name is. There's one school of thought that says if there's a monster in the battle and an NPC, then they should dice off. So, let's roll for initiative. Okay, so you got 18. Oops. 18. You got 20. Oh, this isn't working. But when it comes to big battles, dice just become impractical. And unless you want to spend your session essentially wargaming, they're the wrong tool for the job. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a little wargame as part of an RPG. I love doing mixed media. But if you want to tell the story of heroes in a battle or a siege, then how do we do that? And that is what today's video is about. I have nowhere to put this hand. This table's full of miniatures. I don't know where the character sheets are going to go. So let's take a look at what's going on inside our city as an assault begins. Over at the castle here, a young boy has just fetched 2 pails of water, but he's spilt some over the courtyard, and that sent the maid of the house into exasperation with him, whilst his friend states the obvious, pointing to the well and saying, "You'll have to go fetch some more." The grandmother of the house is looking down over the bailey, and she's looking at some of the commoners who were inside as the gates were lowered. There's a beggar here talking to her husband as one of the local commoners has picked up a broom to try and help out, seeing as she's stuck inside. She feels she has a duty now. She's in the Lord's home. She just happened to be here when the gates were shut. Another is preparing dinner, feeling quite safe within the inner walls of the keep. The lady of the house has gone out to meet her uncle, who was visiting when the siege began. And at the top of this here tower, we see a young lady pointing to the army in the distance. She's the girlfriend of one of the guards. She shouldn't have been here, but now she's stuck inside the inner keep. So she's tagged along. On the high towers of the inner keep, there are of course some guards, but most noticeably some members of an adventuring party who were in town when this siege began. We have an archer up here surveying the battlefield beyond, and up here is a druid beginning the long casting time to call lightning down upon the enemies. The rest of the adventurers are gathered having a discussion, talking to a messenger who's just come in about a relief column that's stuck outside the city. Here one of the city folk looks up the main road past rows and rows of barricades that currently aren't manned, looking at the main gate in desperation. Will the enemy break through? Is this how she meets her end? In one of the larger houses, a lady of the house is up on a balcony. She can see the city walls from here, and she can see the tops of the buildings and the enemies from the abyss hurling balls of flame at the city. Balls of flame which have already left much of this city in ruin. Some of the women have taken to performing old rituals from a long dead religion in a desperate attempt to find favour with the gods and save their besieged city. Is all hope lost? The temple was one of the first buildings to be destroyed. It sat beside the castle, and as you can see, being a religious building, there are already some volunteers that are starting to repair it and make it safe. But one of the reasons that this building is so important is it also contains a field hospital for some wounded men, where one of the ladies is bringing in some water for some of the wounded, and the doctors. We've got a couple of doctors here that have been performing surgeries, and one of their assistants having a little chat about one of the patients. One of the ladies is being escorted by a priestess into the temple. She's bringing her children here in for shelter because her own home was completely bombed out. The outer walls are being manned by militiamen armed with simple weapons like spears and javelins and bows, and a few of them with some makeshift tools like axes, and they've made shields. The blacksmith here has been working night and day since the siege began. Not everyone in the city is a level 0 fighter. A couple of elves were passing through at the time that the siege began. They're stuck here, so they've volunteered their services. But much of the city lay beyond the outer walls of the keep, and it's all now come to ruin as the invading army has reached the outer walls of the keep. And now all that remains are those few lucky enough to be inside the outer walls when the siege began. That's the lay of the land in our city as this siege began. But now we need to add our heroes. In this case, we've got 4 heroes with slightly exaggerated characteristics and some slightly stereotypy personalities. And our party of adventurers just happened to be in the city when this siege began. I lend my wizard book. Hi, you'll never see me. I don't quite know what stereotype I am. For our heroes, the important part of this story isn't rolling fists full of dice to deal with the rank and file. The rank and file of our own side can deal with the rank and file of our enemies. No, for our heroes, it's about those key moments in the battle, those moments where acts of heroism can change the battle from going from one course of action to another. And in this case, the hordes of the abyss have sent forward a mighty creature, a creature of flame and inferno that's going to storm the main gatehouse and set it ablaze so that these creatures of fire and flame can just march through the devastation of the front gate. This creature is too much for the rank and file that are holding the gatehouse. And so, one of the seasoned commanders on the wall, perhaps it's even this elf who's seen battle before, turns to our heroes and says, "Help us, please. Stop it. Stop that creature." For me, I don't like my encounters to be about life and death, about the characters surviving. Otherwise, whenever you have a combat encounter, it's always about trying to scrape through and trying to survive. And it's always a turned up to 12, depleting the player's resources and so forth. No, for me, an encounter, a good encounter, has a failure condition, something that could go wrong and affects the course of the adventure. So if our heroes fail to defend the gatehouse, that's not the end of the adventure. They aren't all dead. But the city will fall. It's a different path down our adventure. The quest takes a darker turn. It's about survivors, about trying to save people, about trying to get out of the city as it's engulfed by the enemy. But if they succeed, a new challenge will descend upon the heroes. Come with me as we look at the commander of the abysmal horde. This Balrog, a creature beyond flame, a creature that is flame itself, descends upon the city, and it is far, far too powerful for anyone but our heroes to contend with. as buildings become ablaze, as more cities and houses are destroyed, as homes and livelihoods are vanquished off the face of the earth, our heroes do battle with a mighty, mighty creature of the abyss. These are the encounters that matter. Let the rank and file just do things themselves. I mean, maybe you can describe as a GM some big movements going on, but they aren't important for the players to get involved. It's not about giving each hero in your party a unit of militiamen to control and command in the fight. You don't want your heroes fighting the rank and file. You want them in those crunch moments that decide the course of the battle. But earlier, I said this was a siege, and that means that months at a time can go by without a single arrow being fired, without a single sword striking metal or flesh. Sieges are about survival. Let's take a look inside one of these houses. The table is bare. There's no food. These are a people who are going hungry. In laying on a siege for your players, a lot of the game could be about survival of a different kind. It's no longer about hit points. It's about avoiding the exhaustion caused by starvation, eating moss and plants. Like over here in the castle, we've got these flowers decorating the front. There's a nutrient in there. There must be a way to cook these flowers and have them edible. In sieges, in military history, civilians have ended up eating tree bark and rats, anything to survive. But what if the only source of water is outside your city walls, and this well that cannot support all of the survivors, and the Lord is keeping it to themselves? The situation could get so desperate that the defenders, gaining a huge advantage being behind their city walls, know that if they stay any longer, they'll die, and the city faces a choice: surrender or sally out. Sally forth. Send your men forward and fight the enemy head on. This video wouldn't be possible without our Patreon supporters, and I just want to thank you all hugely for supporting us, because it enables me to buy toys like this stuff. So I want to thank you all by name: AJ, Brandon Fishwick, Russell Higgins, Dave Poirier, Mark Threlfall, Amber, Jolly Mangina. Is that everyone? The Patreon app for creators is useless.